snow fell in thick flakes across the observation dome, each crystalline miracle illuminated by the pale blue glow of Arcturus III's distant sun. Commander Calith Vorden pressed his palm against the transparent aluminum, feeling the cold that couldn't quite penetrate the barrier. Behind him, Naevia stood motionless, her opalescent skin reflecting the snowfall in tiny diamond-like sparkles. "You've really never seen snow?" Calith asked, watching her multifaceted eyes widen with each new flake that descended. Naevia's head tilted slightly, the gesture so alien yet somehow vulnerable. "My homeworld has no water cycle as yours does, no precipitation of any kind." Her voice carried the slight metallic resonance common to all Lumidians, a sound that had once unnerved Calith, but now felt as familiar as the hum of his ship's engines. Humanity's first contact with another sentient species in over 2 centuries of space exploration, and you evolved on a desert planet. Calith chuckled. The Cosmic Irony Department really outdid themselves with that one. The war between their peoples had lasted merely 3 weeks, just long enough for the initial misunderstanding to be cleared up, but sufficient time for thousands to die on both sides. Now, 2 years into the tenuous peace accord, Calith found himself the diplomatic liaison to the first Lumidian cultural attaché ever assigned to an Earth colony. "Is it customary to simply watch it?" Naevia asked, her translator struggling with the concept. "Or does snow serve some function I'm not comprehending?" Calith laughed, the sound echoing through the empty observation dome. "Both, actually. We watch it because it's beautiful. We play in it because it's fun. And yes, it serves practical functions too. Water storage, crop insulation in some regions. Play in it?" The concept seemed to genuinely perplex her. "Come on," Calith said, reaching for the airlock controls. "Some things can't be explained. They have to be experienced." The protocols were explicit. Lumidians and humans were to maintain professional distance at all times. Cultural exchange was to be conducted in controlled environments with at least 3 representatives from each species present. Direct physical contact was expressly forbidden outside of emergency situations. Calith had never been good at following rules he considered ridiculous. "Commander, I must point out that exiting the facility without proper documentation of intent violates Section 7 of the—" "Filed the paperwork this morning," Calith lied smoothly. "Educational expedition, all approved." Naevia hesitated, her elongated fingers twisting together in what he now recognized as her species' gesture of uncertainty. The bioluminescent patterns beneath her translucent skin pulsed with quicker rhythm. "You're afraid," he realized aloud. "I am cautious," she corrected. "My people do not have your biological adaptability. Unknown environments present significant risk. The atmospheric composition is nearly identical to your ship's," Calith said softly. "Temperature well within your tolerance range. Gravity only 0.2 g stronger than Lumidian standard. I checked all of this before bringing you here." Their eyes met, his brown and ordinary, hers with pupils like fractured amethyst kaleidoscopes. In that moment, something shifted between them, something neither the Terran Diplomatic Corps nor the Lumidian Consensus had anticipated in their careful peace negotiations. "Very well," she said finally. "Show me this. Snow." The airlock door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, releasing them into the winter wonderland of Arcturus III's northern highlands. Calith stepped out first, his boots crunching into fresh powder. He turned, extending his hand by instinct, then quickly withdrew it, remembering himself. But Naevia surprised him. She placed her 6-fingered hand in his 5-fingered one, the contact sending a strange electrical tingle up his arm. Together they stepped into the falling snow, unaware that this simple act would eventually reshape the relationship between their species forever. Naevia's first step into the snow elicited a sound Calith had never heard from a Lumidian before, something that might on a human have been classified as a gasp of delight. The bioluminescent patterns beneath her skin brightened suddenly, pulsing in what he recognized as her species' expression of surprise. "It yields," she whispered, pressing her foot deeper into the powder. Snow collapsed around her boot in a perfect imprint, and yet Retains memory of contact, means memory of... That's oddly poetic, Kalith said, watching her with growing fascination. Matter that behaves as neither solid nor liquid challenges our physical paradigms, she replied, but there was wonder in her voice. She knelt, scooping the snow with her elongated fingers. The temperature transfer is non-immediate, Kalith grinned. You're analyzing it like a scientist instead of experiencing it like a... He caught himself before saying, human. Like a child, she finished for him, her head tilting in that peculiar angle again. Your species places high value on childlike experience. Lumidians consider such regression inefficient. And yet here you are, playing in the snow. Research, she corrected primly, but her eyes betrayed her as they followed another fat flake drifting down from the dome ceiling. Kalith bent down, packed a snowball, and held it out to her. Here, this is what humans do with snow. She accepted it cautiously, turning it over in her hands. A sphere, efficient shape. What purpose does compacting serve? Instead of answering, Kalith quickly formed another snowball and tossed it gently at a tree trunk several meters away. The satisfying poff as it hit made him smile. Now you try. Naivia studied his technique, then mimicked the throwing motion with startling precision. Her snowball flew true, hitting the same spot on the tree with enough force to dislodge snow from its branches. Excellent arm, Kalith noted, impressed. My species evolved as arboreal hunters, she said matter-of-factly. Throwing was essential, for survival before technology. Something about her casual mention of evolution triggered a thought in Kalith. You know, our biologists still can't figure out how your species evolved without water. Every known form of life in the galaxy requires water as a solvent for biological processes. Navia's inner light dimmed slightly, her equivalent of a frown. Perhaps your scientists should consider that there are more solvents in the universe than water. Before Kalith could pursue this fascinating tangent, a sharp beeping from his communicator interrupted them. Captain Marza Alent's voice came through, tight with controlled anger. Commander Vorden, explain why the Lumidian attaché has been removed from the secure diplomatic quarters without authorization. Kalith winced. Captain, I'm conducting an authorized cultural exchange. Save it, Vorden. Marza cut him off. Return to base immediately. That's an order. The communication terminated abruptly. Kalith sighed, turning to Naivia with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry. It looks like our snow expedition is being cut short. To his surprise, Naivia appeared more intrigued than disappointed. Your willingness to violate protocols to share this experience suggests it holds significant cultural importance. I find that enlightening. As they trudged back toward the airlock, Naivia suddenly stopped, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. A group of human children had emerged from a nearby residential dome, shrieking with laughter as they flung themselves into snowdrifts and constructed crude snow figures. Those small humans, she said softly. They appear to be experiencing genuine neurochemical pleasure from this activity. That's one way of putting it, Kalith laughed. We call it joy. Naivia watched the children for a long moment. Joy is not a concept well translated in Lumidian language, she finally said. Perhaps this is why we have struggled to understand your species. As the airlock doors closed behind them, sealing off the winter wonderland, Kalith couldn't help but feel they'd crossed some invisible boundary, one far more significant than the mere breach of diplomatic protocol he was about to be reprimanded for. 3 weeks of restricted duties, Captain Marza announced, pacing the length of her office while Kalith stood at attention. You're lucky the Lumidian consensus didn't file a formal complaint. What were you thinking, Vorden? With respect, Captain, establishing genuine cultural understanding requires experiences beyond sterile conference rooms, Kalith replied, keeping his tone neutral despite his frustration. Marza stopped pacing to fix him with a hard stare. The Lumidians aren't like us, Commander. Their cognitive processes, their emotional responses, everything is different. That's why we have protocols. Maybe those differences aren't as vast as we think. The captain sighed, dropping into her chair. The war may have been brief, but it was devastating. 20,000 human casualties. We don't know how many Lumidians died because they won't tell us. What we do know is that mistakes, misunderstandings, cost lives. Kaleth nodded stiffly. Message received, Captain. Dismissed. And Vorden? Marza called as he turned to leave. The Lumidian has requested to see you specifically for her next cultural briefing. Despite my better judgment, I've approved it. 3 days later, Kaleth entered briefing room 7 to find Naevia already waiting. She stood by the viewport, her attention fixed on the snow-capped mountains visible in the distance. Commander Vorden, she acknowledged without turning. I believe I owe you what humans call an apology. He blinked in surprise. For what? My report to the consensus included details of our unauthorized excursion. I did not anticipate it would result in disciplinary action against you. That's all right, Kaleth said, moving to stand beside her. You were just being thorough. Thoroughness is valued among my people, she agreed. Then more hesitantly, however, I have been reflecting on our experience with the snow. Something in her tone made Kaleth turn to study her profile. The light patterns beneath her skin pulsed in an unfamiliar rhythm. And, he prompted gently, I would like to show you something in return, she said abruptly. A cultural exchange of equivalent significance. Kaleth raised an eyebrow. That sounds intriguing. What did you have in mind? On our diplomatic vessel, we maintain an environmental chamber that simulates conditions on Lumidia Prime. I have received authorization to escort one human representative there. She finally turned to face him fully. Would you accompany me, Commander? The request was unexpected. No human had yet been permitted aboard the Lumidian vessel except for the initial diplomatic delegation, and even they had been restricted to the specially designed interface chambers. I'd be honored, Kaleth said sincerely. Though I suspect Captain Marza might have opinions about that. All necessary authorizations have been obtained, Naevia assured him. The captain has approved this exchange, provided we adhere strictly to safety protocols. Later that afternoon, Kaleth found himself aboard the Lumidian diplomatic vessel for the first time. The architecture was unlike anything in human design, flowing, organic structures that seemed almost grown rather than built. The lighting came not from fixtures but from the walls themselves, pulsing gently in patterns that Kaleth suspected carried meaning he couldn't interpret. Our environmental chamber is adapted to accommodate your biological requirements, Naevia explained, as they walked. However, certain aspects of Lumidian homeworld conditions cannot be fully mitigated. You will experience approximately 20% increased atmospheric pressure and elevated levels of ambient electrical activity. Nothing my system can't handle, Kaleth assured her. They stopped before a circular doorway that irised open at Naevia's approach. Beyond lay a chamber unlike anything Kaleth had ever seen, a landscape of crystalline formations that caught light and fractured it into impossible colors. The air shimmered with what looked like suspended particles of light, and in the distance, towering structures rose that resembled neither buildings nor natural formations, but something beautifully in between. Welcome, Naevia said quietly, to a small piece of Lumidia Prime. As Kaleth stepped through the threshold, he felt an immediate change, a tingling across his skin, a subtle pressure in his ears, and most strangely, a feeling of energetic potential, as if the air itself were charged with possibility. This is, he began, but words failed him. This, Naevia said, her voice taking on a depth and resonance he'd never heard before, is what you showed me in the snow. Something that must be experienced to be understood. Kaleth's first steps into the Lumidian environment chamber felt like walking into an electric dream. Each movement stirred the luminous particles in the air, creating swirls of light that trailed behind him like ephemeral comets. The ground beneath his feet had an unusual give, not soft like soil, but responsive, as if subtly reacting to his presence. The ambient electromagnetic field is interacting with your nervous system, Naevia explained. watching his wonder with what Calith swore was the Lumidian equivalent of amusement. Humans typically describe the sensation as tingling or humming. "It feels like standing in the moments before lightning strikes," Calith murmured, extending his hands to watch the particles dance between his fingers. "Except pleasant. On Lumidia Prime, this field is considerably stronger. It permeates our entire biosphere and is essential to our biological processes." Naevia moved deeper into the chamber, her movements more fluid here than Calith had ever witnessed. "What you are experiencing is a diluted version suitable for human physiology." The crystalline formations surrounding them seemed to sing, not with sound, but with vibrations that resonated in Calith's chest cavity. Colors shifted through spectrums he had no names for, some appearing and disappearing so quickly he wondered if he'd imagined them. "Is this plant life?" he asked, gesturing toward structures that resembled coral formations but pulsed with internal light. "Not as you understand it," Naevia replied. "These are photosynthetic amalgams, but they process energy, not carbon dioxide. They are the foundation of our ecosystem." She approached one of the larger crystalline structures and placed her palm against its surface. Immediately it bloomed with intensified light that spread outward in complex geometric patterns. When she removed her hand, the patterns remained, slowly shifting and evolving. "It's responding to you," Calith observed with fascination. "All life on Lumidia responds to consciousness," she said simply. "Try." Hesitantly, Calith placed his palm against the structure. The sensation was bizarre, warm but not thermal, vibrating but not moving. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, light patterns began to form beneath his hand. Different from Naevia's, chaotic where hers had been ordered, swirling where hers had been geometric. "It's reading me," he whispered, part awed and part unnerved. "Not reading," Naevia corrected. "Connecting. Our ecosystem evolved alongside sentience. The two are not separate as they are in Earth biology." Calith withdrew his hand, watching as the patterns he'd created gradually faded. "Is this why your people reacted so strongly when our first landing parties took samples? We thought it was just unusual environmental protectionism." Naevia's inner light dimmed perceptibly. "When your scientists extracted samples, they were not merely taking specimens. They were severing connections within a conscious network. The pain reverberated throughout our ecosystem, and by extension, our people." Understanding dawned on Calith with sickening clarity. "We weren't just collecting rocks and plants. We were amputating parts of something alive, something sentient. Yes." The single word carried centuries of alien perspective. "My God," Calith breathed. "No wonder hostilities escalated so quickly. We had no idea." Naevia moved beside him, close enough that he could feel the subtle electromagnetic field that surrounded her body interacting with his own. "Your species' inability to perceive these connections is not a failing, Commander. It is simply a difference in evolutionary path." She gestured toward the center of the chamber where a shallow depression formed a perfect circle. "Come. There is more I wish to show you." As they approached the circle, the luminous particles in the air grew denser, swirling with increased energy. Naevia stepped into the depression and motioned for Calith to join her. When he did, the particles around them began to coalesce, forming shapes that grew increasingly complex. Twisted helices, branching networks, pulsing nodes connected by filaments of light. "What am I seeing?" Calith asked, turning slowly to take in the three-dimensional display surrounding them. "This is the neural structure of Lumidia itself," Naevia said quietly. "What your people mistook for a simple ecosystem is actually a planetary consciousness. Fragmented, diffuse, but connected. My people do not live on our world, Commander. We live within it." The implications staggered Calith. Every diplomatic meeting, every negotiation between their species had been approached from fundamentally incompatible worldviews. Humans had been treating with individual Lumidians, while the Lumidians had been representing something far vaster. "Does your planet think?" he asked, struggling to frame the question in terms that made sense. Not as you or I think, Navia replied. But it remembers. It reacts. It evolves with purpose. As they stood surrounded by the luminous representation of an alien planetary consciousness, Kaleth understood why Naivia had wanted him to experience this firsthand. No report could convey the profound shift in perspective it demanded. "Thank you," he said finally, "for trusting me with this." Naivia's inner light pulsed once, brightly. "You showed me snow," she said simply. "I wanted to show you a new world." 2 months after their exchange of worlds, tensions between the human colony and the Lumidian diplomatic mission reached a breaking point. The discovery of rare mineral deposits in the planet's southern continent, minerals critical for both human FTL drives and Lumidian life support systems, had escalated what began as routine negotiations into increasingly hostile posturing. The consensus will not recognize Terran mineral rights in the Meridian Basin, Naivia stated formally during the 14th negotiation session. Her inner light had been dim for days, her translator rendering her speech in increasingly flat tones. These formations are connected to the greater consciousness networks throughout this sector. Admiral Jurek Tavares, newly arrived from Earth, central to oversee the negotiations, leaned forward with barely concealed impatience. "With all due respect to Lumidian cultural beliefs, Ambassador, mineral deposits are not sentient. Your people's religious attachment to crystalline formations does not supersede humanity's need for practical resources." From his position at the secondary diplomatic table, Kaleth winced. Despite all briefing materials provided, Tavares insisted on interpreting Lumidian consciousness networks as primitive spiritualism, rather than the complex reality Kaleth now understood it to be. "Admiral," Kaleth interjected carefully, "the Lumidian position is based on empirical observation of electromagnetic network coherence, not religious belief." Tavares shot him a withering look. "Commander Vorden, your unusual sympathy for the Lumidian perspective has been noted. Perhaps you'd prefer to sit on the other side of the table?" The room fell silent. Even the human diplomats looked uncomfortable at the implication. "I believe," Captain Marza intervened smoothly, "that Commander Vorden's unique insights into Lumidian culture make him particularly valuable to these negotiations. His perspective should be considered an asset, Admiral." Tavares grunted non-committally, before turning back to Naivia. "The fact remains that Earth Central has authorized extraction to begin within 30 days. We are prepared to offer reasonable compensation." "There can be no compensation for severance of consciousness," Naivia interrupted, using a direct form of address that Kaleth knew was considered borderline offensive in Lumidian diplomatic protocol. "What you propose would be equivalent to removing portions of your human brains and offering payment." The Admiral's face reddened. "These hyperbolic comparisons are not helpful, Ambassador." "They are not hyperbole," Naivia insisted, her inner light pulsing rapidly in what Kaleth recognized as extreme agitation. "They are direct equivalencies your species refuses to acknowledge." "Perhaps," Kaleth suggested, "a direct demonstration would be more effective than continued debate." "The Lumidian Environmental Chamber." "Out of the question," Tavares cut him off. "I have no intention of submitting to alien environments that could compromise my judgment or safety." The negotiations deteriorated further from there, eventually adjourning with no resolution. As the human delegation filed out, Kaleth lingered behind, catching Navia's eye briefly. The subtle shift in her luminescence pattern conveyed a message he'd learned to interpret. Meet later. That evening, Kaleth found himself once again in the Lumidian ship's environmental chamber, but the atmosphere was drastically different from his first visit. The ambient particles moved in sharp, erratic patterns, and the crystalline formations pulsed with rapid, discordant rhythms. "The chamber is responding to the collective distress of our delegation," Navia explained as they walked deeper into the simulated landscape. "What you are witnessing is the physical manifestation of what humans might call emotional tension. I wasn't aware your environment was so directly responsive to emotional states," Kaleth remarked. It is not merely responsive, it is an extension of those states, Navia corrected. This is what your admiral fails to understand. The mineral deposits he sees as resources are nodes in a vast interconnected consciousness. Extracting them would be psychically catastrophic. Calith frowned, processing this information against his knowledge of human diplomatic directives. Naevia, Earth Central won't back down on this. The minerals are too crucial for our deep space expansion. Then we are approaching another war, she stated simply, her inner light dimming to its lowest ebb. The consensus cannot permit such extraction to occur. It would violate our most fundamental covenant with our homeworld. They stopped before the Central Depression, where they had previously viewed the neural structure of Lumidia. This time, when they stepped into it, the particles formed not the beautiful, ordered patterns of before, but chaotic, fragmented structures that coalesced and collapsed in jarring sequences. What you're seeing is a simulation of the disruption that would occur, Naevia explained. Not just on this world, but potentially across our entire sphere of settlement. These nodes form a galactic network, Calith. They are how distant Lumidian colonies remain psychically connected to our homeworld. The realization struck Calith with sudden clarity. You're not just protecting resources or sacred sites, you're protecting your interstellar communications network. It is more than communication, Naevia said softly. It is continuity of being. The implications were staggering. What humans saw as simple mineral extraction, Lumidians experienced as an existential threat to their entire civilization's cohesion. There has to be a solution, Calith murmured, watching the disturbed patterns swirl around them. Some way both our needs can be met. Naevia was silent for a long moment, her inner light slowly shifting through complex patterns Calith couldn't interpret. Finally, she turned to him with an intensity he had never before witnessed in her demeanor. There might be, she said carefully, but it would require something no human has yet been willing to consider: true integration with the network itself. Integration? Calith echoed, uncertainty clear in his voice. A joining of consciousness, Naevia clarified. Not permanent, but deep enough to truly understand what is at stake. Deep enough to convey that understanding to others. Even as part of him recoiled at the alienness of the concept, another part recognized the opportunity it presented, not just for resolving this conflict, but for transforming the relationship between their species forever. What would I need to do? He asked. The chamber had been cleared of all other Lumidians. Only Naevia remained, her inner light pulsing in slow, deliberate patterns as she arranged crystalline formations in a precise circle around Calith. This procedure has never been attempted with a human, she warned him for the third time. Our neurologies are fundamentally different. The integration may fail, or worse, succeed in ways we cannot predict. Calith sat cross-legged in the center of the circle, trying to quiet his racing thoughts. You're not filling me with confidence, Naevia. Confidence would be irrational given the circumstances, she replied matter-of-factly, but there was a gentleness in her tone he hadn't heard before. What you are attempting requires extraordinary courage. The knowledge that Admiral Tavares had scheduled the first mineral extraction to begin in less than 48 hours weighed heavily on Calith. Without a breakthrough, decades of careful diplomacy would collapse and the fragile peace between their species would shatter. Sometimes rational calculation demanded irrational risks. I'm ready, he said simply. Naevia completed the circle and knelt across from him. The integration requires physical connection, she explained, extending her six-fingered hands, palms, upward. This violates several diplomatic protocols. Calith laughed despite himself. I think we're well past worrying about protocols at this point. He placed his hands in hers. Her skin felt unlike anything human, cool but not cold, with a subtle vibration that intensified at his touch. The luminescent patterns beneath her skin flowed up her arms toward the connection point between them. Open your mind to the possibilities, Naevia instructed softly. Do not resist what you experience, no matter how alien it may seem. The crystalline formations around them began to pulse in synchronization, emitting not light but something Calith could only describe as concentrated awareness. The luminous particles in the air swirled faster, condensing around their joined hands, then gradually extending to envelop both their bodies in a cocoon of shifting light. The first sensation was disorientation, a vertiginous feeling of being simultaneously within his body and outside it. Colors shifted beyond anything his human eyes had ever processed. Sounds that weren't sounds brushed against his consciousness. Then came the expansion. Caleth's awareness suddenly stretched outward in all directions, as if his mind had become untethered from the constraints of his skull. He felt Naivia's presence, not as something separate but as an extension of his own consciousness, guiding him through the unfamiliar psychic landscape. This is the network. Her thoughts came to him, not as words, but as pure concept. What one experiences, all experience. What all know, one knows. The boundaries of his identity began to blur. He was Caleth Vorden, human commander, but he was also simultaneously experiencing fragments of countless other consciousnesses, Lumidians across the planet, across the star system, even faint echoes from distant worlds. Their thoughts, memories, and perceptions flowed through him in a torrent of information too vast to comprehend. And beneath it all, steady and ancient, pulsed the vast planetary awareness Naivia had shown him. Not a singular consciousness, but a gestalt of countless smaller awarenesses, bound together in a symphony of interconnected being. Now you understand what the extraction would sever. Naivia's presence guided him toward a particular node in the vast network, one that corresponded to the mineral deposits in the Meridian Basin. Caleth perceived it not as rock or crystal, but as a crucial nexus of connections, millions of pathways, of consciousness flowing through it, binding disparate parts of the network together. It was like looking at a vital junction in the human brain and realizing someone planned to mine it for copper. Yes, Naivia acknowledged his understanding. Not resources, connection. But even as he grasped this truth, another revelation unfolded. Through his connection to Naivia, he glimpsed the Lumidian understanding of humans. Isolated consciousnesses, each locked away in the prison of individual experience. Their perception of humanity was tinged with both fascination and profound pity. We are not meant to be alone, the network seemed to whisper through Naivia's guidance. Connection is life. With sudden clarity, Caleth realized the true nature of the conflict between their species. It wasn't about resources or territory, or even cultural misunderstanding. It was about fundamentally different modes of existence. Collective, consciousness versus individual identity. And in that moment of understanding, a third path revealed itself. When Caleth returned to his singular consciousness, he found himself still sitting across from Naivia, their hands joined in the circle of crystals. Hours had passed, though it had felt like both an instant and an eternity. "Did you see?" Naivia asked, her translator struggling to convey the complexity of her question. "Yes," Caleth whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "And I know what we need to do." Admiral Tavares stared incredulously at the proposal Caleth had placed before the joint delegation. "You want us to build the extraction facility around the mineral deposits, without actually extracting them?" "Not around them, Admiral, through them," Caleth clarified. "The minerals themselves would remain in place, integrated into the facility's design. What we harvest is the energy they channel, not the physical material." "Preposterous," Tavares scoffed. "Earth Central demands tangible resources, not metaphysical energy concepts." "With respect, Admiral," Captain Marza interjected, reviewing the technical specifications. "Commander Vorden's proposal appears scientifically sound. These readings suggest the energy output would be exponentially more efficient than what we could achieve through conventional processing of the extracted minerals." From across the chamber, Naivia's inner light pulsed with what Caleth now recognized as cautious optimism. The consensus could accept such an arrangement, provided the network's integrity remains uncompromised. "More than uncompromised," Caleth added. "Enhanced." The facility would serve as an amplifier for both purposes, human energy production and Lumidian consciousness connection. Tavares frowned, clearly struggling with the concept. And you came up with this? How exactly? Kalith exchanged a brief glance with Naevia. Some experiences couldn't be explained, only lived. Let's just say I gained a new perspective, he replied simply. 6 months later, the first human Lumidian synthesis facility came online in the Meridian Basin. As the systems activated, Kalith stood at the central control platform beside Naevia, watching energy readings climb far beyond projected estimates. It works both ways, doesn't it? He asked quietly. The facility doesn't just preserve your network. It creates a bridge for human consciousness to touch it as well. Naevia's inner light pulsed in the pattern he now recognized as affirmation. The beginning of a greater connection, she agreed. Not integration, not yet, but the first steps toward mutual understanding. Outside the facility's viewing dome, snow had begun to fall across the highlands, the first snowfall of the season. Inside, the crystalline formations at the heart of the facility pulsed with new energy, sending ripples through networks that spanned worlds. I took you to see snow, Kalith said softly. Naevia's inner light brightened as she completed the thought. And I showed you a new world, but together, they had created something greater than either could have imagined alone. Not just a facility or a diplomatic breakthrough, but the foundation for a future where two profoundly different modes of consciousness could exist not merely in peace, but in harmony. In the gently falling snow outside and the pulsing networks within, two civilizations had taken their first step toward becoming something entirely new.